With the transformations available on the object, what comes into play is pivot points of the objects. Now, the pivot points are, you can think of them as like for all intents and purposes, the center of the object. But it doesn't have to be at the center of the object. It could be off the object or towards the edge of the object. So it's a central focus point of the object is how you should think about it, not literally the center location per se. So I'm going to shade. I produced a cone. I shaded it, and I'm focusing on that. So I'll illustrate the pivot points. What the pivot point is. So if you pick the object and choose to manipulate this object, location or rotation or and so forth, there is a default location of the pivot point. In the case of a cone, it's located in the bottom center of the face here. So what you see, it's barely visible, but it should be a green point here. So when you rotate, scale, or move the object, that point in the bottom of the bottom circle face of the cone is what the object's central focus point is. So that's why when you rotate this, that center of that circular face in the cone is the part of the cone that actually doesn't um, move when it's centered around that pivot point. So that's actually not a bad, a confusing concept, but there comes a time when you need to move the pivot point to a different location. Like for example, instead of rotating this cone like this, let's say you want to be able to rotate this as if this was like a bell. It's being which is being held by the top and then being shaken like this. So in that case, what you want to do is what you want to move that pivot point. Choose move pivot point and then move the pivot point to a different location. You can move the pivot point like in the XYZ direction. You can see this point being moved. Or I'm dragging it in the X, Y, or Z direction. You can do it like this, but that's not exact. So if you want to precisely snap this pivot point to the top of the cone, then you would use the curve snap. There's another video for transforming objects with the snaps, but I'm using the curve snap. So that will be Control Alt click drag, and you see how that pivot point is dragging across the reference curve, and you can do that to any visible lines on any object, solid line or dotted line, it doesn't matter. So now I have reset the pivot point of the cone from the bottom of the center of the circle face to the top vertex of the cone. And now rotation occurs like this. And scale will do this. So, and when you move this object to any grids, then it will snap with respect to the pivot point, which is the top vertex. So in all intents and purposes, the pivot point is the central focus. Oops, I lost the object. Let me do Alt L to get that back into view. So pivot point is the central focal point. As far as the software application is concerned, that is the object. The object is located where that pivot point is, and all of the operations like move, rotate, scale happens with respect to the pivot point.